on YouTube. It's been
Yeah.
an invaluable opportunity. Plus, no pressure, Marty, but we've been sharing these videos with our ASCE National, and they've actually
Okay.
been sharing some of our content on a national stage just because this program has been very kind of groundbreaking for ASCE, trying to get the YMs involved. So
Great. Great.
yeah, so hopefully this presentation of yours will find its way to people all across the country.
All right. Well, great.
Well, now we've got the recording started. Go ahead and introduce myself for the video's sake. Hello, my name is Nick Phillips. I'm the branch director for the Dallas ASCE branch. And today we'll be having a fantastic presentation over project quality control. As everyone most usually knows, QC process is a huge part of what we do here. As engineers, every project, big, small, requires just such a keen eye and a very detailed perspective for the entire project. Starting out in our careers as a young engineer, I've definitely seen how developing this eye for detail in and day out can be such a struggle. There's a reason why I've gotten to the point where I have PTSD every time I see a red mark on a page. I see a red pen on my desk. I'm like, oh my God, it's gonna kill me. The QC process can definitely be a beast to get used to. So getting to learn all the ins and outs and how to self-check yourself and better how to help your project managers have an easier life and limit the amount of red lines you get on those pages, it is critical. So today I'd like to introduce our speaker. We've got Marty Paris. He is a VP or Vice President with Kimley-Horn Associates and has been working with them since 2005. Before that, he worked with Half Associates, where he racked up 12 years distinguishing himself as a project manager. He attended the University of Austin in Texas, hook 'em horns, let's go, and received his bachelor's in civil engineering degree there. And with that, Marty, I'll go ahead and give you the floor and let you speak a little more to yourself and give us a presentation.
Great. Well, thanks for that introduction. I can go ahead and share my screen and we can kind of get started here. So I'm going to pull this up. Hopefully you can see this. Is that showing up there okay now?
Yeah, looks perfect.
All right, great. Well, as Nick said, I've been working as a civil engineering consultant for 27 years here in the Dallas area, and I've had an opportunity to work on a lot of great projects for the city of Dallas and other clients across the state. And so today we're going to talk about quality control. So I've got a little Wordle here that I put together, and I'd like for you to take a look at these and see if you see any common thing between each of these words here. You probably recognize some famous engineering disasters is basically what this Wordle is showing us here. A lot of these things are, if you kind of look at some of the worst engineering disasters, some of these will come up from the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the Skyway for the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City, where a couple of walkways fell on in a hotel where they were having a dance underneath, and hundreds of people were killed. The Titanic, of course, they've made movies about some of these. Chernobyl, the Challenger in Columbia, both of those have happened in my lifetime. So the Challenger explosion happened when I was in high school. I was a junior in high school in 1986, and remember hearing about it, in school. And then Columbia happened in 2003, and I remember because it happened over Texas, I actually heard the sound of it in my home on the day that it happened. I was playing with my daughter, who was only 2 years old at the time, and I thought somebody had dropped something, like a limb had dropped on my roof or something, because there was a loud noise. And I went outside, and later on I found out that it was actually the Columbia space shuttle that had disintegrated as it was coming into the atmosphere. And so all of these are examples of things that we don't want to happen, right? We don't want to be associated with an engineering disaster. And a lot of these did result in the loss of life. And some of them, when they did the forensics, they found out that some of these were direct results of engineering errors or engineering flaws that took place. And so that's important. As engineers, we have a big responsibility. And so that's why we're talking about quality control today. So first, let's kind of go over some definitions. The first definition I wanted to kind of walk through is what is quality. So a good definition that we like to use is, quality is meeting the requirements that have been expressed and agreed to by the parties that are involved. And so some clients that you work with may have a very specific, expectation of what quality is for their project, and other clients may have a very different expectation depending upon, the type of project and so forth. So it's important to understand what the expectations are for the level of detail and the quality that the client is expecting when you're working on a project. And, as engineers, we use lots of acronyms. And so one of the ones that you hear all the time is QAQC. And sometimes as a young engineer, people come in and they're like, I don't even know what those stand for. But the QC stands for quality control. And so a good definition is, the measures that are taken within a project to produce that work that is acceptable to the standards and the contract requirements. And so to be able to meet those quality expectations, those are the specific steps that you're going to take in order to meet those expectations. And then the QA is quality assurance. And so there's a little bit of difference between quality control and quality assurance. Quality assurance is the measures that you take to ensure that those QC actions are happening, are actually being performed when you're doing a project. And so it's the things that you put in place to make sure that you've got those QC steps taking place. So before we kind of get into some specific quality control tools, I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about the client's perspective of quality, because the client's perspective for quality is not just about, being technically accurate. That's definitely a part of it. They expect that we're professional engineers. The plans that we produce are going to be technically correct, technically accurate. They're not going to have flaws like some of those disasters that we talked about, where there was an engineering calculation that wasn't correct and it resulted in a failure, a structural failure, or some other type of failure. But they also include the expectations for things like I've got listed here on this slide. Value to some clients. One of the most important aspects to them is being able to have a project that helps to minimize the cost of construction for that project. And so part of our quality is understanding what are the things that we can do that we can standardize materials and things that we can specify that will help bring down the cost instead of having, elaborate, very custom, structures or designs that are going to cost the client more. So part of the value to them is, for us being able to minimize costs for them. Another is just the type of service that we're providing to them. Quality to them is also, our responsiveness when they call and they have a question or they need something. We're being able to provide quality service to them. In addition to that, it's professionalism. A big part of quality as engineers, and especially as consulting engineers, is being professional and being able to hold confidential some of our clients' information and being able to represent them well in settings, whether it's in front of the public or at a city council meeting or in meetings with stakeholders. And so that's an important part of quality as well. And then clear construction documents. And a lot of times what I'm talking about there is unambiguous plans, right? So you don't say something over here and then it's contradicted by a note over here or a detail that isn't consistent with the general notes. And so making sure that your plans are very clear and so that the contractor knows what is required for the construction of that project. And also, a lot of times being clear, like we talked about earlier when we were chatting beforehand, is that some of the old hand drafted plans are some of the most clear and beautiful plans, just because they took the time to make sure that everything was legible and easy to read. And so doing the same thing with our plans is important as well. It's part of the quality. And then another big part of it is identifying and being able to help mitigate potential risks to the client. And so we can do our projects and we can produce a set of plans, but if we haven't helped the owner realize, okay, there's a potential risk with this this project that you're moving forward with, and here are ways that we can help mitigate the risk. So maybe it's something like there's a high pressure gas main that you're going to be crossing with your water line. And so in order to mitigate that risk, we're going to go ahead and do SUE, subsurface utility engineering, to identify the exact location and elevation of that crossing, because that's a high risk to the client. And so helping them identify those types of risks is an important part of quality as well. So now let's go ahead and talk about some specific quality tools that we can all implement on our projects. So one of the important things I think that we can all develop are just some design checklists. These are things that we can help us to know, okay, what is expected or what needs to be a part of my different milestone submittals. So your 60% level, your 90% level, your 100% level, these are the things that we want to make sure that are going to be a part of those contract documents, whether it's plans or specifications, that you can easily go through and make sure that you've got everything included that is expected and needed for that submittal. Another good tool is to have example go-by plan sets. And so you've completed a project, it was a good successful project, you had a clear set of construction documents. You can have that as a resource, especially for your new and young engineers, to be able to say, hey, here's a good example of what our plans should look like, and how the things that need to be included on those drawings. And then having a standardized review procedures. So let's say that you've identified, here's our procedure for once you have a drawing that's been worked on by a young engineer. And so then you identify the procedure, okay, how is that going to be checked? And so you may have a procedure where one person marks it up with, as Nick said, with the famous red pen, or a red pencil, that you have red marks all over the plan sheet of the things that need to be corrected or considered. And then there's a procedure when the person has worked on those red marks or those markups. Once they've identified or addressed those comments, then they go back and have a procedure for showing how they've addressed them. So a lot of people around here in the past have used a yellow highlighter to be able to highlight the things that have been completed, and then maybe have a different color that they use for things that they have questions about still, or they identify them in a certain way. But having some standardized procedure so that you can say, okay, it looks like, they've been reviewed by a senior person. Now we've addressed those comments, and if there's additional stuff, here's how we identify that. And so having those types of procedures is important. And that's part of what Ashton will talk about a little bit later today too, when she talks about Bluebeam, just some of the new tools that we have now to be able to do that electronically. And then another good tool is to develop a library of lessons learned. And so things that you've learned from a previous project where maybe something went wrong or something went really well, and you want to capture that and be able to share that with others, so that they either don't repeat a mistake, or they're able to learn from something that was done well. And so developing a library of lessons learned is another great tool for quality control. Now I want to talk a little bit about quality assurance. So quality assurance, remember, is the measures that we take to make sure that the QC process is taking place. And so one of the things that we like to assign to every project around here is a quality control manager for the project. And that's usually just a peer, another project manager who's not involved with the project, who is helping the project manager keep track of the quality control program, or the things that are going to be done for that specific project, in order to make sure that you're putting out plans and specs that are quality. And so the quality control manager, if it's a small project, he might be the one who does the independent reviews, and he's the one who checks on the markups that they've been done after they've been marked up and so forth. But on a large project, the quality control manager may not do any of that. He may just be the person who's going to pull in the resources or identify the appropriate people to do those independent reviews. And so if you have a multidiscipline project, you might need someone who's a structural expert to come in and do the structural QC. You might need someone who's a hydraulics expert to come in and do the hydraulic QC. And so you might be able to have to pull in multiple people to do the independent reviews. And then for the quality assurance, the technical advisors could be additional senior technical advisors who may come in at certain milestones of the project to be able to ask questions, identify potential other solutions to consider, and so forth. And it's usually best to bring them in earlier on in the project, maybe at the 30% conceptual phase, in order to help you think big picture and understand, okay, what are some of those potential risks that we talked about before, and help you to begin to formulate some alternatives that you might not have thought of on your own. And then the other thing, on big projects, we typically like to develop an actual quality management plan that kind of outlines these people that are maybe involved in the quality control, and also a schedule. So part of that is saying, okay, we're going to build into our schedule the QC process. And so we know that our submittal to our client is 2 weeks away, but we need to have the QC set ready to be reviewed, maybe 4 or 5 days ahead of that, and so you build that into your schedule from the beginning, and even include, a quality kickoff meeting or a portion of quality to be discussed during your kickoff meeting with your project team. And so those are all ways that you can develop quality assurance into your project. And then the other thing is make sure that you budget for quality. In your fees and in your budgets that you're going to use, you got to set aside some money for those QC reviews to be taking place. And so what we've seen is that quality is typically about 2.5% to 5% of the overall design budget in order to be able to have the appropriate reviews for that type of quality. And so that's kind of quality assurance. We talked about quality control and quality assurance. Now I'd like to just talk about the quality mindset and think about it from the perspective, even as a young engineer, realizing that everyone is responsible for quality, not just the project manager, not just the quality control manager, but every person who works on the project needs to take ownership of quality for the project. And even if it's not a part of the project that you're the task manager, or you're working on that task, but if you see something that, hey, I've got a question about how these two things relate together, it looks like there might be a potential conflict. And so, taking ownership of that and pointing that out and taking responsibility for quality is important. Another thing we talk about a lot around our office is this concept of continuous quality improvement. We call it CQI. So again, we like to use acronyms. But continuous quality is the process of making small little improvements in the process, all throughout the design process and throughout your career. You make these small little incremental changes, and over time it makes a huge difference and improvement in your overall quality. And so it's important for us. We try to reward people when they come up with new CQI ideas, and so kind of keep people motivated to continue to make those small little improvements in the process. And then also developing a culture of sharing your lessons learned. Sometimes we get embarrassed by making a mistake, right? We don't want anyone to know, but it's important to share those lessons learned, especially with people who come after you, younger people. They're coming into the industry, and share those lessons, and you may have to share them over and over again. I've got lots of lessons that I can share for my 27 years of experience, but it's important to share those lessons so that other people can learn from your experiences. And then the last thing is asking for feedback. When you're working on a project, it's important to get feedback from your supervisor, but we also think it's important to ask our clients, how we're doing on quality, and hearing that feedback can help you make those improvements as well. And so we developed a quality call program where every year we spend a lot of time calling clients on our projects and just asking them questions on how we can be better, and that provides valuable input on helping us make improvements. So before we kind of wrap up, I've got one more story for you, and then I've got a quote for you from that I think will be good. But the story is from 2005. I got an opportunity to go to Cuba with a group of people from my church. And what is Cuba really known for? They're known for great cigars, right? And so while I was in Cuba, I got the opportunity to do a tour of one of their factories. And so it was the Monte Cristo factory. And they hand roll all of these cigars, by hand. And so we were walking through the factory, and they had, people just sitting on rows and rows of benches, and they were rolling these and meticulously rolling these cigars. And you could tell that they took great pride in what they were doing. And of course, they're known as the best cigars in the world. I'm not a smoker, but I did have to buy a few for my friends back home and family. So I did bring just a few back. You couldn't bring a bunch of them back because that they were not allowed at that time. But I was able to bring some back. But one of the things, I wish I had a camera with me at the time. That was back when I only had a flip phone, and plus they didn't let you take cameras in there with you. But I was walking, as we were walking through the factory, there was a glass window, and you could see inside, but it had on the window, it had a sign that said quality control. But the person in there, it was probably around lunchtime, but the person in there was asleep. They were like laying their head down on the desk, and they were totally asleep. I thought this would make a great picture, quality control, they're at sleep. But when you've got such great people who are doing such a great job working, the quality control guy doesn't really have much to do. He's kind of bored, right? And so, that would be probably a great goal for us to have, is to do such great work that our quality control people kind of get bored because they don't really have much to mark up. So my last statement here is a quote from a former NBA player as well as a coach. He coached the Los Angeles Lakers back in the 80s during the time of Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but he was a great coach. And his definition of excellence is the gradual pursuit of always striving to do better. And so I encourage you guys to pursue excellence, but making just little improvements and every day seeking to be a little bit better. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions, I'd be glad to try to address them.
Awesome. Thanks, Marty. Yeah, we'll go ahead and open the floor up now. If anyone has any questions, please do type in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question. I'll go ahead and start it off. Marty, go as a young engineer with going into the QC process and trying to turn in drawings. What are a couple of the biggest slip ups that you find for your younger engineers? What are the things that they trip and fall over?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, I think sometimes it seems like they get so focused on just getting to the deadline, and we get so crunched that a lot of times we get down to the very last day, and we don't leave enough time for the QC process, for someone to review it, and then there's a lot of frustration. The engineering process, what I try to remind people, it's an iterative process. You design something, and then there's revisions that have to be made just because a better idea is come up with, and so forth, and that can be frustrating. I know to some of our young engineers, just the iterative process, and so making time, so that you kind of build that QC into it, I think is a big mistake that I think a lot of them get frustrated with. I don't know if Ashley wanted to add anything to that. But.
That's what I was going to say, is just the timing of everything, right? So like Marty mentioned, we've got a deadline of we need to submit plans and specs to our client on this day, but really that means that we should probably have everything ready to go for internal QC, maybe a week beforehand. And so developing that internal timeline and schedule, knowing how long to leave for the QC process is a developed skill. And that what goes along with that is knowing how long it will take you to address comments. Once you get the internal QC set back, I still work on that skill of estimating how long it's going to take to do something. So sometimes young staff will look and say, oh yeah, I can knock these out in a day. And then a day and a half later, they're still trying to get everything wrapped up because stuff pops up, CAD crashes, the printer's not working. So I always encourage our young staff, okay, how long do you think it's going to take? Okay, let's multiply that by 1.5 or 2 times to give ourselves some buffer so that we don't get into crunch time at the end.
Oh, that completely makes sense. And I would imagine that whenever you're creating that schedule and trying to estimate how much time to put in for the quality control, you have to then not only take into account the project itself and the adversities that come through that project, but also the individual's skills and adversities that come with that person's maybe their skills and shortcomings. So I can only imagine that just comes with experience. So it looks like Jonathan's got a question here. He said that, and to answer your question, we didn't cover this. So he said, with the initial switch to virtual working environment this time last year, did you notice any specific challenges or difficulties with the QC process overall?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start with that. I think the biggest challenge for me was we lost that ability for someone to just drop by your office and say, "Hey, I've got a quick question about this," and that a lot of times that will help solve some of the small little things. And so I was getting stuff sent to me as a PDF after they kind of did their best shot at making a lot of assumptions, and then there would be a lot more things that, oh well, because you assume this, basically everything after that needs to be revised and so forth. And so it felt like there was a lot more having to backtrack just because of there wasn't as much interaction on a daily basis, of stopping by and say, "Hey, I got a quick question for you." So.
Yeah, it looks like Amanda has a question as well, maybe.
Yeah, Amanda, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask about specifically the lessons of library, or the library of lessons learned. How do you keep that information relevant and get it to the people that need it instead of just kind of having it sit there and get forgotten about?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we've done that in the past where we've kind of put a lessons learned in a folder, and then no one ever kind of goes back and reviews it. So one of the things that we try to do is make it a part of our weekly meetings, and so sharing a lessons learned every week, and assign that to somebody on the team, and so that every week we know that someone's going to have to bring a lessons learned to share it with the team. And then just recently we decided, hey, let's go back and rehash some of the ones that we did a couple of years ago, so our new people might be able to learn from those as well. So that's kind of how we've been trying to keep it fresh.
Yeah, Marty mentioned CQI, and that's kind of a Kimley-Horn specific acronym, but we have CQI champs. And so on our team, there's a couple of our younger staff that are designated as the CQI champs. And so they're the ones that organize that lessons learned segment in our Monday morning staff meetings. They have a name or a cup full of names, and they draw people and say, okay, Anthony, can you give us a lesson learned next week? And then they also take, what are the 5-minute lesson learned shared each week and put that in an Excel document. And so they're kind of responsible for continually reminding us, hey, this is here. If you've got a question, it might be worth searching our lessons learned library. And because we do it every week, like Marty mentioned, I think it's really good to keep that in the forefront of our minds.
That's a really good thing that you guys mentioned. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, having the accountability with people on your teams to make sure that you are always referring back to those lessons learned, and kind of going back to previous lessons learned on other projects. I can imagine that is incredibly invaluable. So if you don't mind me asking, do you at Kimley-Horn just have like a database for each team? Is it a company-wide thing where you can go back and check it out?
Yes, both.
Both, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do some team specific, because our discipline is different than some of the other disciplines, and so we have some very specific things for our team that we like to share, and we've got our own little library. But then there is a firm-wide on our kind of our internal KHA net where people can share lessons learned more broadly. So.
Okay, I can see how that'd be super helpful. Well, thank you guys. I know we're coming up to about 1:30 here, so go ahead and see if anyone has any more questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to move on and start handing the floor over to you, Ashlyn.
Sure. Yeah, any other questions for Marty?
Oh, all right, guys. Well, thank you, Marty. Thank you so much for donating some of your time today to speak on the QC process. It sounds like you guys are crushing it over there at Kimley-Horn. Sounds like you've definitely got lots of experience on keeping the young engineers in check and making sure the quality of work is nice and good to go. I hope that a lot of people got a lot out of that presentation. I definitely did, especially with the lessons learned list. And I think one of the things I like to think about is having a sticky note or just a little notebook next to my desk that it's all right, if I do this or run into this is what I should do. So seriously, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, well, Ashlyn, I know you're here to give us a little presentation on Bluebeam. I want to say thank you for also joining us today. Yeah. so many great things about Bluebeam, and I know that's kind of been the new trend in PDF work lately, and I've been a huge proponent of it actually in my company as well, trying to get them on board with it just because it's working on our team. It's invaluable. Being able to collaboratively work on the same document is awesome. So I'm very new to it myself. So do you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about it and show some tips and tricks that you've got?
Sure. Yeah, I'll share my screen in here in just a second. But Nick, you might have a little bit of a leg up on me because we do not yet use Bluebeam Studio as a collaborative environment. But I do. I mean, Bluebeam has just been such a powerful tool. Jonathan's question of with the switch that we had last year and that many of us are still working in of work from home environments, how did that impact us? What did that change? And I think for me, one of my struggles was switching to more of a digital environment because I try and work digitally a lot, right? And that's become more and more integral to the workplace. Like Marty mentioned, he didn't even have a computer when he started 27 years ago. I've grown up in the computer age, but I still also sometimes am very paper-based. I like printing things out and being able to look at them. And so it was a bit of transition when we went to work from home last year of going, kind of without a choice to solely digital. And so I had been using Bluebeam before, but definitely started using it a lot more last March when everybody went to work from home, and picked up some tips and tricks to use it in a variety of functions, not just for QAQC, but in some other ways to just add more quality and value to your work. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen, which I've got my Bluebeam pulled up. And I want this part to be really interactive too. If y'all have questions about, well, can you do this, that, or the other? I wanted to highlight some tools and some ways that I use Bluebeam that have been really useful to me, but feel free to chime in. So I think Nick can probably share with us some about Bluebeam Studio, which is basically a cloud-based document sharing platform. So with your Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office, we have the capability here at our firm to share those internally so multiple people can be editing the same Word document or Excel. Bluebeam Studio gives you that same ability with PDF documents. So multiple people can be in, a 60% QC set at the same time and making comments on plan sheets. How we have typically addressed that or used that is we'll share a link to the document and save it in a common spot on the network, and then multiple people can open that individually or and mark up things in different colors, right? And you also have the capability to transfer to export markups to plan sets. So if you need to be working on that at the same time, you can. But let's just start with the basics. So Bluebeam Review software, in its most basic sense, can be used just as a regular old PDF viewer, right? So it is an alternative to like Adobe or Acroplot Matrix. And so this is what the interface looks like when you open it up. You've got your different tabs up here for different files that you have open. One nuance that was a slight adjustment for me, and you can change this setting, but the scroll wheel, if you have a multiple page document and you're trying to scroll through, the default setting is when you scroll your mouse wheel, obviously you can't see me doing that, but when you scroll your mouse wheel, the default is that it zooms in and zooms out instead of advancing to the next page like you would maybe expect in Adobe Reader or something like that. But if you hold down Control, that'll actually let you scroll from page to page. You can also click over here in kind of the track scroll bar over here, and then your navigation tabs are also down here. Again, that's something that's a setting that you can change if you go up here to Review and Preferences and Navigation. There's a lot of customization of your settings that you can do in Bluebeam, but I've actually grown quite fond of being able to easily zoom in and zoom out without using the plus and minus scroll buttons or holding down any other buttons. A few recommendations of other toolbars to bring up. So if you hit View up here, you can turn on your rulers. That's really helpful just to see page size or approximate sizes. You can change the interface. Typically, I work in dark mode, which is a little bit easier on my eyes. You can change, that's another one in preferences here. You can go from light to dark, but we'll cancel that so it doesn't reset my Bluebeam. This might be a Kimley-Horn specific item too, but basic PDF viewing function. But if you want to go into markup mode, which we're about to go into, for us, you have to activate markup mode. That checks out a special license so that you can actually mark up and edit the PDF, because we have a limited amount of licenses, and so we don't want everybody in markup mode all the time if you're just using it for basic viewing. So a couple other items that I use Bluebeam for, obviously and this is just in the basic PDF viewing function, but another helpful item. So for example, if I've got one of our clients' budgets here, and their budget is on multiple pages. So they've got fiscal year 19 through 20, but then it spans across to this other page. I'm like, well, one option to see this all in one spot would be to print these pages and tape them together and hang them on my wall. But one of my favorite things about Bluebeam is creating PDFs and being able to add in multiple clippings. You can add in images. And so this is just a brief example of something that you could use this for. But I say, okay, I want to go ahead and put this all in one digital page so that I can easily see it. And so if I go over here and use my G key for snapshot, so Bluebeam also has a lot of keyboard shortcuts, so get familiar with those that are going to make you a lot faster. So G is the snapshot tool. So I can take a snapshot of this page and paste it here, and then I can go to my next page and take another quick snapshot there, and then go ahead and paste it over here. You can put those guys right together, kind of merge, combine. Now you can edit and mark up, and save this document, create new documents, right? So again, these are all very basic functions. So now when we're going into markup mode, thanks, Tyler. Now when we're going into markup mode, a lot of really great commands that you can use in markup mode. And similar to AutoCAD, if you're looking for a certain toolbar, one toolbar that I really recommend is the measure toolbar up here. So if you, similar to AutoCAD, if you just kind of go up to blank space and right click, you can add toolbars and that'll save to your settings, right? But again, I've become very familiar with my quick keys. So when we go to some of the markup tools over here, we can add text boxes, call outs, we can highlight, add lines, polylines, rectangles, a lot of keyboard quick commands. So get familiar with those, right? So if I want to come in here and I'm trying to, actually, let's go to our site plan. So this is an above ground site plan of one of our jobs in Dallas. And there was actually a basement that wasn't shown in plan view because this only showed above ground items, right? But if we really wanted to highlight this for someone, we can say, hey, here is the pump station basement. You can come over here to your settings pane. So if you click on something, I typically anchor my properties over here on the right side. So we pop those out. You can change the outline color, the fill color, the opacity of different things. You can add hatches in there. You can rotate markup. So you can do, and similar with, circles, ellipses, polygons, lines. So this is an example of kind of QAQC for my own self. Actually, this PDF package is a job that we did, and then it went into construction. And so I actually saved down a copy for myself, and every time an RFI came up or just a miscellaneous contractor question, I would keep my own copy of markups. And so, for example, here, they were doing piping modifications here, but they ended up removing all of the pipe, or this whole section of pipe, leaving the pump station, so the pump station discharge line. So I just wrote a little note to myself of, hey, this pipe was removed. Typically at the end of a project, a contractor will give you a very marked up plan set so that you can create record drawings to document what actually went in the ground, what was actually built. But what we have found sometimes is that sometimes those contractor markups leave a little bit to be desired. And so this is kind of a QC backstop for myself of just throughout the project, I'll just add notes and items so that when it comes to record drawing time, again, we can produce high quality record drawings without having to rely solely on what the contractor is doing. So this is a good sample of some of those markups, you know, rectangles, text boxes, leaders, items of that nature. And then, like Nick mentioned, QAQC for others. And so let's see if I've got a sheet here. So this was a first draft of a waterline shutdown and sequencing plan. I told our EIT, hey, you know, take a stab at writing down coordination notes and kind of order of operations for this waterline relocation and connection, transfer, switch over with Highland Park. As you can see, I had an awful lot to say about it, right? So this is the scary red pen in digital format, but this was actually a lot more useful for QAQC than me just taking a red pen and trying to communicate all of this, right? So I got to sit down during QAQC process when I was reviewing the plans and write out all of the notes that I wanted, send it to our EIT, and then they were able to copy and paste those into CAD instead of having to decipher my chicken scratch. So that's another really big benefit of Bluebeam, is that especially those PMs with really horrible handwriting, I've helped a lot of EITs. Hey, can you tell, like, what did Kyle write here? Can you decipher this? Bluebeam eliminates that issue. So it's really great for that as well.
I would imagine that also saves you a lot of time, you know, when you were talking about earlier about
Absolutely.
creating that quality control time budget, you know, I would imagine that Bluebeam being able to just pop this in and being able to show these kind of comments real time would save you a lot of time on the long run.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep, that's a great point. Some other ways that I've used Bluebeam that I think are really helpful, comparing documents and overlaying documents. So actually, let me go back to this really quickly. So again, when you're just kind of going through and reading, let's see, what's going on with my keyboard? I think my keyboard has just died, which is great. But when you're going through and reviewing plans, just looking at plans, viewing plans, and you want to compare different items, let's go ahead. Let's see, I'm trying to go to page 20, so we'll get this to load. So if you've got, you know, at the office, it's great. We've got this really massive set of screens to work on, but even then, sometimes it can be hard to see multiple things at once. And so a great thing about Bluebeam is the split screen function. So you can pull up multiple documents, the same or different documents in two different view windows or more. You can actually add several others, but we'll just do one here. And so say, okay, I want to look at this pipeline in plan view. Let's kind of see schematically what we're showing. But then over here, I want to look at the same one in profile so that I can make sure that our call outs are lining up, or, you know, our station labels are consistent, or we're using the same descriptive text in plan view labels and profile view labels. So split screens is a super handy function. There's also the sync document command, which is great. So let's go to another sample. And we've got, go ahead and cross that out. Get rid of that one. Let me open up one more document, which I had open earlier. So again, over here on your left side, you can click this file access, and that'll bring up a lot of recent documents. And so that's really handy to open up kind of documents that you recently had open. And so let's see though if we've got this in here. Nope, that was several documents ago. So let me pull up this guy really quickly. Apologies for that. So in this instance, we've got two somewhat similar building inspection maps. So for this job, we were working on updating a building inspection map for our client, Highland Park. And so we had an old AutoCAD style map and a newer GIS-based map. And I wanted to compare those side by side to see if we were showing the same thing, you know, combined lots in similar areas. And so You know, you could click between one, kind of zoom in over here. Okay, let's zoom into that same area over here. Well, if your documents are the same size, down here, kind of hiding in the bottom right, there's a synchronize view command. And so if you click that, it'll actually get your documents to behave similarly. And if you scroll and pan and zoom in on one, it'll do the same on another. So it makes document review really handy. So we can say, okay, we've got those two combined lots, great. Okay, and this one on the right, we're showing 2 lots. This one on the left, we're showing 3. There's the discrepancies there. So you could use Bluebeam to kind of highlight that area or mark up that area. So the sync tool is really handy if you're comparing two similar but not exactly the same documents. Another great Bluebeam tool is that actually will do that for you is the compare tool. And so sync is a great way to kind of look at 2 documents if you're just kind of trying to get a feel or compare 2 different areas. But there's also an official compare tool. And so I've pulled up 2 documents here, 2 plan sheets that look very similar, but there are some slight differences. And so if you didn't want to, you know, split views and go back and forth and try and where's Waldo or spot the differences on this, there's actually an official compare command. And you can come in here and it'll have all of your open files in here, and you can say, okay, document number 1 is this, document number 2 is that, and Bluebeam will generate a document, a brand new document, a 3rd document for you that highlights where there are differences between your 2 documents. And so you can see, okay, on this one, it looks like there were some building outlines added. Okay, the north arrow and the scale got moved over a little bit. So this might be handy too if you're working with architects and they send you site plan version 57. You're like, okay, what's different about this one? Let's get Bluebeam to help us out and to highlight some of those areas where there's differences. Another tool that I found super handy is overlays. So here is a sample of a schematic site plan that we received from a client, and they showed, hey, you know, there's a TxDOT road coming through here at some point in the future. Well, we received the TxDOT 60% plans and wanted to compare what they had originally very schematically showed with what TxDOT showed. And so hidden in here is an overlay. And so I actually took a screen clipping of the TxDOT plans. I rotated it, scaled it, added it to the plans, and shaded it yellow. And you can change the opacity of that overlay too. So if you can play with this, turn it up, turn it down, kind of toggle back and forth to see how the 2 plan sets compare without having to transfer it or trace it or try and figure it out and scale it in there. You can add screen clippings or overlays. This actually helped us to see, okay, TxDOT has some drainage easements proposed right here, and it looks like the previous improvements were going to be encroaching on that drainage easement a little bit. So we probably need to ask the client to move these improvements a little bit further away. So that plan comparison tool is very helpful.
Well, I can imagine that feature in itself is crazy valuable whenever you're talking about the when you're starting the pre-construction process, whenever you're taking 1,000 different as-built and you're putting them all together, built from different years. Not only does it allow you to kind of get a comprehensive look of, okay, here's the water, sewer, and storm, but you can also say, hey, this was built in 85 and this was done in 2000, and you can see the differences.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
wow.
This is one of my favorite tools to use. And like I said, you can fade it back so nobody ever knows, but you can bring it a little bit more to the forefront, trace things, point them out a little bit more clearly. It's a really quick way to create useful visual exhibits. And so on that thread, I want to go to, I guess, one final thing that I really like using Bluebeam for is just adding visuals. I'm a very visual person. I would much rather be able to show you a picture of it. I mean, I think that's engineering of what's the best, clearest way that we can communicate things, right? And so here is a sample scope that I have. We're doing a development review, and okay, a private developer, this is just a Word document, private developer is doing this site out by Lake Bridgeport. It's bounded on the east by private road 3204. Kind of looks like a janky sideways L that's really fat on one side. I wouldn't obviously write that, but when we're trying to write descriptions of this piece of property is located right here, or this water line, is on the south side of the road and then crosses over and then goes this far and then turns. In words, that can be very, very cumbersome, right? So instead of trying to do a lot of word description, what I have started doing instead, and I think adds a lot of value to our written content, is, let's see, pull up our awesome Google Earth here. So I know that the site is here. I'll use my awesome snipping tool. So another bonus trick, snipping tool is fantastic. And so I'll copy and paste that out. I'll come and create a new Bluebeam document. Let's go ahead and do another new one over here. Landscape guy, go ahead and paste that Google clipping. I typically like to try and get the Google copyright in there, so I'm not, officially stealing it. But then we can come in and do a nice polygon. I say, okay, well, here's our actual site area. So let's kind of outline that. And you can draw in a rough polygon instead of having to describe all of this and exactly where it is. Draw in a polygon and say, okay, let's make that orange. Let's amp it up just a little bit. Use our snipping tool again and, add some text labels if you want to, but I'm just doing this quickly here. But instead of having to describe this, or in addition to just describing all of this, we can go ahead and put a quick image in our exhibit. And I think that adds a lot of power and a lot of clarity to scope and fees, reports, whatever. Obviously stuff like this, a nice shaded exhibit on an aerial, you can create items like that in GIS. You can create that in AutoCAD. But Bluebeam, at least for me, is going to be a lot more efficient and allow you to make quicker changes and label it how you want to without having to open up a separate program or spend a little bit more time in creating an official CAD or GIS exhibit. So those are some ways that I use Bluebeam in my day-to-day life. It has really become indispensable for me. I typically always try and snag one of the markup licenses first thing in the morning because I use it a lot throughout the day. And that's what I've got for you today on the power of Bluebeam Review.
Wow, thank you, Ashlyn. I am blown away by how much you can do, and in many different instances. I did have one quick question though.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you are overlaying multiple documents, how much does that affect the actual document size, and how does that affect your ability to work within that document? Like, is it slow it down a lot? Is it still keep up pretty well?
That's a great question. So let's see, the document that I have saved with the text.markup in it, it is about 1 meg. So it's not really a significant size. Let me actually pull up on my other screen here the original plans versus the plans with some markups in them. And so let's see. So the original document, or the original schematic, the 60% plans. Let me go to this shortcut. We're probably in the 50 meg range, and so this was one sheet from it. And you're combining two plan sets. So we had 50 and we had a 10. One page of that is 1 megabyte in comparison. And so I don't think that it's going to have a significant effect on, or negative effect on, file size being an overlay. Sometimes I do run into issues with using Bluebeam simply as a PDF viewer because it's such a powerful program. Sometimes it lags a little bit because there's a lot going on in the background. And so in some instances where I'm just looking to open up a PDF read-only, don't need to do markups, just need to be able to scroll through really quickly, I'll still use Adobe for that. But I'll use Bluebeam anytime I need to do markups, combining documents, creating new PDFs, etc.
Wow. Okay. So then, it's pretty much good in all instances, but in certain circumstances, you get almost too much horsepower, so
Right.
it's a little bit easier to downgrade to the Acrobat.
Yep.
Okay. Well, cool. Does anybody else have any questions for Ashlyn here? I mean, Gosh, Ashton, I feel like you should be a spokesperson for Bluebeam at this point.
She's getting some kickbacks here. Yeah.
I'm telling you, I mean, like you said, as engineers, we're all very, I don't remember to say all, but generally a lot of us are very visual people. So getting to see all those different visual representations is awesome.
Yeah, and one more item, I use it for drawing a lot. So I pulled this up, but I didn't share it. But this was just a visual I created for a town manager of how do water towers work, how do elevated storage tanks work. And so versus trying to CAD something up to show grade lines, I was able to create this somewhat simplified drawing with some clip art and with just different color-coded lines and labels to create a simple report figure. Again, I'm not in AutoCAD a lot anymore, so for me, this is a lot faster to work and create figures and images and infographic type stuff.
Okay, and invaluable. Jonathan, did you raise your hand? You got a question?
Yeah, I was just going to share too that Bluebeam themselves, they have a really good help website that you can go to, and it's kind of like people can contribute to it as well. And they even have this thing called Bluebeam University where you can take courses on all of these features. So
Yeah.
it's really powerful. There's so many things you can learn.
Yes.
Wow, okay, talk about work efficiency right here. I like it. All right, well, I guess that's kind of it, guys. We're coming up here on 2 o'clock. So thank you again, Ashton, for taking the time to showcase Bluebeam. Seriously, between you and Marty, this has been a great hour. I've learned so much.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. It's a cool
Yeah,
program.
hopefully we can have you on again sometime in the future.
Sounds great. Everybody have a great day.
You too. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Mondays.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.